Thank you so much for having me and for the warm intro. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. I know you're kind of working remotely here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Tell us what have you been up to besides working?
Yeah, oh my God. I've been really busy aside from working as well, really exploring my life in Hawaii, over the weekend, like hiking, checking out different beaches. And actually for the Memorial Day weekend, I'm going to Big Island as well. So really excited.
Cool. So is this your first time in Hawaii?
This is my second time. My first time was really just a vacation last December. I came here with my boyfriend and spent a week here. Totally in love, but didn't expect that I would come back for more. But then it turned out 2 months or even less than 2 months later, I moved over to Hawaii, just to leverage this work from home environment and totally in love with it.
Yeah. So since when were you here?
Since February.
Okay, great. So it's been a couple of months now that you've been
Yes.
here. So, I think let's just dive into all the incredible things you have done throughout your career. First and foremost, for people who have read your profile, you kind of have been all over the world. You've
Mhm.
lived in the US, you have lived in Tokyo in Japan. Um, you know, you're from China. So, tell us, where were you called home? And again, maybe what brought you to the US?
Yeah, sure. I call home, I would still say China because that's the place I was born and spent a significant amount of time in my childhood and still, I still owe my education and a lot of the mindset that I have to the really, the initial education that I had. Um, and aside from that, I probably say I call Japan as my second home because I also spend a lot of time there in my adult life. Nobody's studying or working. I actually work in terms of my career life. I probably spend the most time in Japan compared to the US because I came here more recently. So I think the time in Japan also influenced me in a lot of ways as well. And I call it my second home.
Awesome. So, let's kind of go through, your career path a little bit to set the context for, the other questions that I have for you.
Sure.
I remember you telling me that your undergrad was in East Asian Studies,
Yeah.
but it seemed like you went straight into consulting after graduation. Can you,
Yeah.
tell us more about that and what prompted you to make that change?
Yeah, this is a great question. And although on my resume it looks just like a quick pivot, but I also spend a lot of time contemplating and exploring and talking to a lot of people when I was at school. As you mentioned, my major was East Asian Studies. I think one of the reason is even to this date, I'm still very passionate about international relations, international affairs. And I grew up in a small town in China, but I've been like always curious about like a bigger world and always, dreaming about exploring the bigger world. So that prompted me to study East Asian studies because I was dreaming of about becoming a diplomat or a policy maker in order to influence the international relations. And at school at UPenn, at that time, I got a chance to visit some really high-profile think tanks and talk to some governmental officials working in this industry in DC at that time, and just figured that the actual things that I do and the whole how to say that image is very different from what I initially thought. So and also throughout exploration and internship and different kind of things, I realized that I can also influence international relationships from a business angle. So I started diving into the business scene and started my career as a consultant instead of going into the public sector.
Cool. So did you start in the US or did you start in Tokyo? Maybe walk us through that.
Oh yeah, so I studied in China and then moved to Japan for like short-term exchange study, and then after that I came to the U.S. for my master's degree at UPenn to focus on East Asian studies
Okay, and then after that, you got your job in consulting. Is
in
that how it worked?
consulting. Yep.
And then
Hmm.
you worked for Capco. Was it in the US before?
Yeah. Their headquarters is in New York, so I joined their New York office before I got transferred to Tokyo.
How did that happen? It
Yeah.
was interesting. I think you mentioned that to me, but tell the audience.
Yeah, sure. It actually happened totally in an unexpected way because I joined the New York office and I wanted to develop my career in New York and East Coast, and at that time there was an opportunity in Tokyo office. Actually, our North America office is separated from the Asia office, but somehow they found my profile. They knew that I could speak Japanese, so they said, "Well, actually, we got a really good client project in Tokyo, working with a really big financial institution there. So, are you interested?" So it was really totally unexpected, but I said yes to that because although I spent time in Japan as a student, but I never ever had a professional life in Japan or in Tokyo. So I was open to it, and then yeah, I never regret the decision.
So are you able to share a little bit about what you did in Capco in Tokyo?
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's the same with what I did in New York, but we are a financial consulting specialized firm. So we work a lot with investment banks. So in the U.S., I engage with projects like in Fannie Mae. So in Tokyo, I also work with a global investment bank and help them on review their processes, enhance their efficiency, and also design like a strategic plan for their future medium and long-term growth. So this kind of project.
So how was the experience working in Tokyo? We talked a bit
Yeah,
about it too.
yeah. I would say because the caveat is, my experience may not be representative of other people's experiences. It's really in like very personal journey. I would say it really depends on the team and culture, the team and the firm. So for example, when I went to Tokyo within Capco, and it's a consulting firm, and we work with like a domestic, bank. So that culture is very different from Goldman Sachs, which we will talk a little bit more later, which is American firm. So even the Tokyo office is very Americanized and a very different vibe compared to a Japanese company. But overall, I actually had a very, very positive experience. Of course, I know before I departed for Japan or Tokyo, people are like, "Oh wow, the working hours are crazy. Can you handle it?" But I think I sort of handle it. I think I deal with it well. Partially maybe because the financial industry, no matter it's in Japan or in the US, it's kind of like the same kind of working hour. So there's like really a significant gap for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've worked in East Asia as well, before coming to the US, and we talked a little bit about, the hierarchical structure, the very masculine kind of or male-dominated, work culture and environment.
Yeah.
Did you face any challenges as a woman or as a foreigner working in Tokyo?
I think initially as a foreigner, especially when I started, working as a consultant with a domestic bank, I felt the hurdle is more about being as a foreigner, you have to always adjust your behavior to the Japanese norm of professional culture, and also some clients, they couldn't speak English at all, and at that time I was still developing my Japanese proficiency. So I think the challenges were more around the culture and the language barrier initially. And after I joined Goldman, I think it became more, I think instead of, because in Goldman Sachs, even in Japan, a lot of foreigners working there, even a lot of my Japanese colleagues, they were raised abroad and they are very international already. So they're not like Japanese. So I felt that at that time, the challenges of working in that firm is more like as a woman. And I didn't like mean that as a woman that you face some like explicit verbal assault or anything like that. And I got promoted very quickly after I joined the firm as well. But I think it's more about, sometimes it's more the day-to-day perception and how you should conduct yourself. So for a very specific example, I I was like in my professional mode, I can be very direct, very straightforward. If I think of something, like in the meetings, I would just raise it up. And then in like a regular review meeting, and my manager is like, hey May, I want to tell you something. You should like be softer, or don't be so direct. And I later found that it's not just me, but in general, because the perception, especially as a woman, even in a professional setting, generally be like the likable, softer, considerate, and don't speak up too like faster, or don't speak up too quickly, or speak up first before your senior people speak up. So those kind of things I started learning, and picking up, and be more aware of the general, the norm or the perception, for me to better adapt to the local environment. I think that was the challenges that I faced, and had to learn how to cope with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, I think so. My question for you is, were you a very direct kind of communicator before you started working in Japan, or is that your natural style of communication, or was that something you felt that you had to, kind of bring up as someone who's different, right, and communicate in that manner? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I never thought that I was a very direct or straightforward person until I like get more uh, immersed into that corporate environment. But it's a funny thing that after I moved here, and then work more, or even during my MBA, and then I started getting feedback that, oh, May should be more direct. May should not be so reserved. May should be open to share more. So I think partially, at least, it's really attributed to the different culture and perceptions about you. It's not about me as maybe in the Japanese corporate environment setting, I'm more like direct, straightforward, a little bit aggressive type. But then the same me in the corporate environment, I was like perceived as a quiet, reserved Asian girl, and not open up too much, to enough, or something like that. So yeah, I think that's sometimes just like the different context.
So do you feel like you have to kind of now overcompensate and talk more and speak up more now that you're working in the Valley?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, I think we can talk about it more later, especially it's like the venture capital industry is still very white male dominated. And no matter, I know myself, I'm not shy, and I'm never, hesitant to speak up, but still in that overall, like a bigger context. And then I started being aware that I'm perceived in particular way, and I have to combat against that image. I think that's something that I also learned, along the way across different cultures, because always like be aware of how people perceive you, and then adjust to that image, or sometimes try to change that accordingly.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so challenge as in terms of communication styles, I completely understand. I faced that myself, kind of working across different continents. So yeah, how about, Goldman? Tell us a little bit about that. How was your experience over there? You said it was a very much more Americanized firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Goldman Japan, it's more American. Definitely, I think it's more the comparative term compared to other, American investment banks in Japan. For example, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. I think compared to them, Goldman Japan, it's definitely, I felt, more Americanized in the way that it encourages people to take more initiative, and it just like the office vibe is like louder, and people are talking, joking, laughing. But because when I was a consultant, I worked with Morgan Stanley on a project, and I definitely feel the vibe is very different. Even it's American firm, but it's like very quiet on the floor, and I feel I have to stand on my tip to when I walk by, and don't make any noises. So yeah, so overall, I really had a positive experience of working in Goldman Japan. But again, of course, you have to be aware of the cultural nuances and how people perceive you, and the overall personality of people you're working with, and then try to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, here being in Hawaii, I do know of a lot of people who, have worked in Japan or would like to explore opportunities in Japan, working in Japan. It seems like yours wasn't, kind of planned, but you were kind of prepared for it because of your knowledge in Japanese language in a way. Do you have, any other tips or advice for people, who are exploring, working in Japan? How do you think they should prepare for it?
Yeah, I think one is just go there. And I've seen a lot of my friends that I met in Japan, they're like, my life dream is to live in Japan. So they got the gut to quit their job, whatever it was, the previous job, and then they flew to Japan and then have that, 2-3 months exploring it, and sending the resume, going through interviews. I think that's really brave. But a good news is actually I feel overall, because of the aging society and because of also I think overall pretty open governmental policy for foreign immigrants, it's actually, I don't think it's that difficult to land a job in Japan, especially if you can speak English. So I think, yeah, one is to just take the opportunity, fly there, go there, and then explore locally. That's more efficient. But I know not everybody's able to do that. So I would say, on one hand, definitely develop your Japanese speaking skill as well, because a lot of companies, if you want to work in Japan, they still require at least minimum level of Japanese proficiency, and start building your network. Even you cannot fly there, especially now because of the travel restrictions, but build your network, think in long term, and talk to people even remotely on the ground, understand what's the job market like, what kind of companies are looking for people, so that gradually will pave way to the final destination.
Mm-hmm. Is LinkedIn a good platform to kind of start your job search in Japan, or are there other platforms that you would recommend?
I don't think LinkedIn is that popular compared to the use here in the US. A lot of people, I think, in general in Asia are not, the adoption rate is pretty low. So you can use LinkedIn to check when you are doing your research, to check what is the corporate title of this interviewer or this kind of background information. I think it could be helpful, but I feel like most people are just not really responsive on LinkedIn. Other local websites I'm not super familiar with, and how I got my job in Goldman, actually, just to share maybe some of the personal experiences, is through Headhunter. So I think maybe another tip, just add back to the previous point, is to develop network with Headhunter as well, because a lot of especially Robert Waters, Robert Huff, and then another one, Hayes. I think they are very well connected with especially a lot of global firms in Japan, and particularly looking for bilingual talents. And a lot of the headhunters themselves are bilingual people, or people who are international background. So they, leverage them well, and then they have tons of information that you don't know. I think they will be a good channel for people who want to break into the Japanese market too.
Would you be proactive in actually reaching out to those headhunters, or do you kind of put up your profile on LinkedIn and just wait for them to contact you? How does that work?
Yeah. So it was so at that time I was looking for a new opportunity, and my friend who found her job through Hayes, which is one of the top human resource consulting agencies, and she connected me with that headhunter, and he had said, "Oh, I think your profile would be a perfect match with Goldman." So I also didn't really know those headhunter or agents are so well connected, but it's really randomly that because my friend, I was lucky enough that connected me with the right person, and the right person found me the right opportunity. And so now looking back, I felt it could be a good way, you know, for people who want to find a job in Japan, maybe more proactively reach out to those headhunters. Could be a good way.
Awesome. So one of the persons from the audience, he left a comment. So Jonathan is saying that he appreciates you sharing your experience in a male-dominated environment. And he thinks that adapting to this environment should be the responsibility of the industry and not, individual women who are trying to succeed. So thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
We hope, other men would think the same way. You had
I
another
wish you
question.
had more men in the industry like you.
He had another question for you that I'll get to as we talk about, kind of your experience in venture capital, which I think would align more to his question. Before, so after B school, you kind of made that switch from, more of financial consulting into the tech industry in a way. And, maybe you could share a little bit about that and also talk about your experience in Poland, which I thought was really fascinating as well.
Yeah, sure. Maybe start from the first question about why switching to venture capital or tech. So I think for me personally, I've been always like curious about venture capital. Even when I was, an investment banker in Tokyo, and pre-MBA, when I was thinking about my post-MBA career, venture capital is actually high on my like dream list, or the ideal, kind of positions that I wanted. So I started exploring. Of course, at that time, venture capital was not the only one. There were some other two kind of like dream industries that I want to explore. And how I explore, well, one is MBA, because MBA, during your 2-year program, you have a tons of time opportunities to talk to people from that industry and get internships there, get actual, your hands-on experiences. So that can validate your hypothesis. This is one of, one process for me to figure out which one is really something I'm truly passionate about and something truly fit for me. And another, I think something really resonated with me was before my MBA started, I went to Kenya in Africa to work with a local startup there. It's an ag tech startup, and it was super early stage, but I was there working directly with the co-founders to help them refine their corporate strategy, build the partnerships, think about like their go-to-market, which like how to tailor the marketing messages to the farmers, all those kind of like operational things. That was my first time, because it's such a different world of working in a like bulge bracket investment bank, and then in a very like pre-seed startup in Kenya, in Africa. It's so different, but also just exposed me to a very, very different possibility that, oh wow, like in this like venture system, I feel so much more impactful. Like daily job maybe is not so much different. I still make PowerPoint slides. I still talk to people. I still get on meetings, but the impact it may make, the influence you can have on this company's trajectory, as well as just the mission aligned, because I know my work is directly relevant to thousands or even millions of farmers locally. So that kind of the sense of purpose really, I think it's a mind-blowing experience for me, and also make me further reflect, what do I want for my career? Is that just prestige? Is that just about, money, about like having high profile, or something truly meaningful? Of course, like you have to have economic return, otherwise you cannot survive. But
yeah,
that's how I also started figuring out venture capital. I think it sits for me personally, in the sweet spot of having the mission and the impact, while it also can earn you some, at least it's not like make me a millionaire in like one day, but it's really give you that financial support or financial security you need to have a quality life. So I feel that's the
The sweet spot.
intersection.
Oh, intersection. Sure. So, was it in your role in venture capital that brought you to Poland, or was that a project before you actually went to venture capital?
Yeah, so that was through actually one of the VC firms that I interned with during my MBA, and the Poland opportunity is from one of the portfolio companies of that VC firm. So I started interning with the firm, and then I was like, hey, I actually want to be on the other side. I want to be an operator and see how the story is like on the other side. So the firm was very supportive, and then I joined their portfolio company as an international expansion officer, because at that time it was actually good timing for me. They started in Nigeria. They're an African startup, but they were doing very well and they were doing international expansion. So they chose Poland as the entry point into European market. And at the point I was joining, they were just, started researching the market and building a new office in Poland. So I was there, working with the co-founders on as an initial, like we only have 5 people working from WeWork, co-working space. And then it's pretty much like building a startup from scratch. And also that was my first time being in Eastern or that region. And it was really, really, I would say, eye-opening for me and changed a lot of my perceptions about Europe that I had previously.
Yeah, so just curious, why Poland? Is there a reason why they chose Poland?
Yeah, so when we had this like strategic discussion about what's the best entry point, we had several criteria. One is the headquarters is in Nigeria, and we don't want to spread ourselves too thin, say you have another office in Asia, because the hour difference wise would really make, a lot of just the time zone wise, it would make it much more difficult. So the criteria is it's within 3-hour difference of time zone, no matter it's go east or west. And the second is the fast growing economy. Something similar to Nigerian market, and they also have the needs, especially demand from the SMB, small, medium-sized businesses in the market who needs funding, because the company itself is a lending fintech that particularly serve the SMB industry. So we also look at the number of SMBs in the market, the demand and the growth rate, for example, and how open the local regulation is. So all those factors together, we found Poland as a very interesting market, although the market size might look a little bit small, but it has access to the Western Europe and bigger EU market as one of the members, and it's actually growing very fast. I think even during financial crisis in 2008, they were the only country of positive growth rate in Europe. And there's tons of tech talent there and much lower cost compared to other countries, especially in Western Europe. So we felt that Poland is an ideal entry point for us.
Awesome. So, kind of going to venture capital is a no-brainer for you, given your background and your training and, through your time in the financial consulting world, and then kind of your passion and your purpose, your mission, and your curiosity in technology. So after B school, you went over to FinVC, am I right?
Yep.
You want to tell us a little bit about that firm?
Yeah, sure. So FinVC, I think it's just a natural fit with my background and what I've done before, because FinVC is a B2B fintech focused global venture capital. So as I mentioned, it's like only focused on fintech, and I've done fintech and I've come from this financial services background. So the industry is a great fit with my background. And also it's a global venture capital. I think that's also something really attracted me because a lot of VCs in Silicon Valley, they're still very, very Silicon Valley focused or America focused. But FinVC, we've made investment in a lot of different regions across the world. And I'm also, part of my responsibilities right now is to help the firm launch a strategy with focus in Asia. So a lot of global exposure and a lot of growth opportunity, and I think that also fit naturally with my personal background across the globe and individual passion as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you have, so of course Hawaii has its own, slew of startups that are looking to fundraise. Do you see any opportunities for Hawaii startups? What are you guys looking for that, they can position themselves for?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. I think probably this advice might be really general, but I think no matter if the startup is based in Hawaii or in Arizona or Texas, wherever, I think the key question nowadays VC ask is still about the value proposition and the scalability. So I think in the context of Hawaiian startup, I think then it's about, maybe when you are talking to VC or doing fundraising, you should really think about, why why a startup from Hawaii can do this thing compared to startups from other places. So I think have that mindset of like how to uniquely position yourself and have a credible storytelling, with the of course with the bearing in mind the scalability. So even though in Hawaii you have this proof of concept or proof of demand, but then what's the next? Can you scale to further to other states, to maybe even North America or across the globe? Because VCs eventually, they're looking really into the scalability, and the long-term sustainable profitability. So I think this might be a very general advice, but I think that's general. No matter where you are based, this is what VCs will think very intensively.
I see. So VinVC only looks at B2B financial solutions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not,
Yep.
no, like not other kinds of solutions would would be something that you guys would consider.
We look at B2B or particularly focused on enterprise SaaS, so meaning startups that whose direct customers are like enterprises. So in that sense, we don't do any like direct consumer facing investment. But that being said, we've invested in a very interesting company actually called Greenlight. And everybody who is interested, feel free to search it. Greenlight, they do B2B2C. And what they do is they work with retail banks like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and all those retail banks to issue co-branded debit card to teenagers. And then the teenagers can manage their co-manage their financials with their parents. So say the teenagers get the card, but the parents can, easily wire payment from their bank account to the teenager's bank account and have a full visibility of how the spendings are, and also like reward them for say housework or something like that. So that's a very new concept, and that's how we are thinking about tapping into the consumer sides of business. So it's more through B2B2C.
I see. On that note, I actually want to go back to the question that Jonathan left for us in the Q&A. He's asking, maybe I'm just going to narrow it down a little bit because his is pretty broad, but maybe from a fintech perspective, how does China, I don't know if you look at China, but China, Japan, and even the US compare? Any trends that you see that would go across, or major differences?
Yeah, sure. Yes, fintech is a very, very broad topic because we have, under fintech, it could be like insurance, insurtech. It could be like the fintech apps that we use every day, like the payment Venmo or Alipay, WeChat Pay, or it could be like Robinhood, investment brokerage type of fintech. So under that, I think really, really high level trends that I've seen like between Asia and the US is I feel in Asia, particularly in China, the B2C fintech market, to some extent, are much more advanced and much more, but also more saturated than the US. So I think probably a lot of audience know, like in China, like even 5 years ago, people already told me when you go on the street, it's like you are a dinosaur if you carry a wallet, because if you just have your phone, and then on your phone, WeChat can do every single thing for you. no matter it's a payment, it's a purchase, if it's like ordering menu, anything can do just on that or on your phone alone. But then I think, for example, in the US, only very recently, people started like the QR code, and it's also accelerated by COVID. If it's not COVID, people probably would be more like used to the cash or maybe not cash, but credit card, or, just like touch, the payment method with touch points. So on that front, I think B2C model in Asia is more advanced. And I think another possible explanation is that, for example, China has such a huge population. So it's much easier to roll out the solution and get a larger adoption rate. But that being said, I think fintech in the US, the enterprise SaaS part is definitely more advanced. And when you think about just overall the SaaS businesses, no matter it's a fintech or biotech, overall SaaS market in the US is the most competitive one across the world. Because when I talk to, say, European startups, they would start thinking to enter US market from very early on, because for a SaaS startup to kind of like establish the category leadership, they have to establish their footing in the US, no matter that they want or not. So yeah, I think that's some general observations that I've had.
So does your firm also look a lot at cryptocurrencies? That's like a hot topic these days in, the financial world.
Yeah, definitely. To some extent, it might be like overhyped.
Yeah, and also China banning cryptocurrency institutions and companies. I think starting yesterday. So it'll be really interesting to see how it pans out. But what do you guys look at from that space?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we look at like under the framework of B2B. So we don't say like do direct trading of the cryptocurrency per se, or any like customer facing solutions, but how we are tapping into this, the crypto digital assets tokenization or blockchain space is really about how the startups can enable financial institutions or enterprises to catch up on this wave. So one example is staking as a service. I don't know if that rings a bell, but as more and more financial or banks, like for example, JP Morgan, they issue their own stable coin, for example, and they are providing custodian services to cryptocurrencies. So as you see those mainstream institutions enter the space, and then there's naturally a need for them to adopt a new type of technologies that they traditionally are not able to, or they do not have the infrastructure to. So yeah, for my firm, we look at from that angle of blockchain enabled enterprise application, no matter it's like, for example, this staking as a service, tokenization as a service, or how we leverage the smart contract or distributed ledger to better manage the data, because historically has been very centralized in a server or a private on-premise or a private cloud, but how they can manage that better using this blockchain technology is another use cases. So yeah, there are tons of potential of adopting the blockchain or crypto technologies.
Awesome. So we talk a lot about the serious stuff, so I want to go back kind of a little bit more to the fun stuff. So what you mentioned a little bit earlier, but what do you enjoy most about being kind of a venture capitalist?
Yeah, I really enjoy just the kind of, how to say, that you are forced to learn new things every single day. It's like your job. You're paid to learn new things every single day. I just think that's fascinating. A lot of people refer venture capitalists as like the expert or industry, like has very in-depth knowledge about certain vertical. That's definitely true. We have to be. But on the other hand, we are talking to startups every single day, and it's always new idea, new solution, new technology. And it's my job to quickly catch up and learn new things, so that I will be able to advise the startups. I will be able to make judgment on the investment opportunities. So it always have that kind of force behind you that push you to learn more, to adapt to new things and keep on, this learning curve, and it never ever ends. So that's something that I enjoy the most as a venture capitalist.
Cool. So, what's, now that you are an associate, what's next for you in this career path as a venture capitalist?
Definitely promotion, but I think it's like very general for everybody. But joke aside, I think I do want to, because my firm, we consider ourselves as an emerging manager. By emerging manager, we mean usually people refer that as the fund that has raised less than three individual funds. So we are on our fund 2. I joined the fund when it closed its fund 1, and now we already finished our fund 2 raising, but we still are in emerging managers, just considering the time and the number of funds that we have. But so I think just because of the timing, there are so many things I can do and help the firm scale. And there's much, I think, a bigger footprint for me to put in the firm. So one thing I think I mentioned a little bit earlier is something that I've been really thinking a lot is how I can help my firm be a truly global venture capital instead of just a very narrow-minded VC stuck in Silicon Valley. So yeah, I think that's something that's my next step, and also being the bridge to how to say that, to bridge the gap between where the capital sits and where the capital is most needed. Because throughout my experiences across different, no matter Europe, Asia, emerging markets, developed countries, it just seems there are still so many gaps, that there are so many talented entrepreneurs all around the world. But because of the immature ecosystem, because of the lack of access to funding, or the investors sitting miles away across the ocean, there's a lot of discrepancy there. And I want to bridge that gap and really lead the capital to where it's most needed. And I believe that's my mission, and how I can make an impact for the industry and the world as well.
Awesome. So, for yourself, you talked about kind of probably the person that has an expertise in the Asian market in your firm, correct? Do you, that's kind of, I think, a unique way to position yourself for, this opportunity. But for people who are looking to, kind of carve out a career in venture capital, do you have any tips, advice for them, how they should steer their way through?
Yeah, sure. I would say my journey of breaking into venture capital is not like flat and like smooth, like just happened overnight. I also went through, a lot of like struggles and failure and exploration. So I think in general, getting to VC, it's pretty much like a startup big pitch. You'll get a lot of rejections, but don't be discouraged. This is the first rule and rule of thumb. And the second is really about how to position yourself, find your storytelling that really you own it. So for me, for example, my storytelling is, I'm seeing the intersection of fintech, of Asian market, of also operating experiences as startups in emerging markets. So that makes me unique. And I think everybody has their unique stories and unique background. You have to put the different dimensions together, of course, meaningful dimensions together, and then form that unique position for you. Because instead of like trying to LinkedIn or cold emails every single VC, I think that first of all, you should know yourself first and know what's unique about you. And then based on that, and then research what kind of firms what might be interested in me, or I could be a fit, or I can add the most value. And then from there, do more focused outreach. I think that's the second step. And third one is really be prepared about the investment thesis. So usually, VCs will ask you, what's your investment thesis? What vertical are you most excited about? So prepare that a lot, have your own ideas, not just something that you Googled the previous night, have a very thoughtful, in-depth thinking about that, and be able to demonstrate why you believe in this vertical, why you have that investment thesis. So I think once those are lined up, and then it's just the rest is just time. Just be resilient and be patient. Don't be discouraged, and you'll get there.
Can we ask you how many firms you tried applying to and got rejected?
Yeah, I'm actually happy to. So I kept track of the firms that I mentioned the dashboard when I was recruiting, and I recall the firms that I like seriously applied and seriously followed up. There were 17 of firms I applied, and out of the 17, I got 5 or 6 interviews. So you see from there, it's like a huge drop already. Yeah. And by the way, the interviews, they came from various ways. Some were like, I just applied online. Some were like networking. Some were like even cold emailing. I got interview, and some are like through introduction. So various kind of different channels. So out of the 5, 6 interviews, and eventually I had this one offer, and another one I just I withdraw. I got to a very final stage, but I knew that VC is a better fit for me, so I withdraw from that interview. So as you can see, from 17 to 5 or 6 to this final one, or maybe potentially 2, there is like this. Eventually, it's a number game, and this the conversion rate of the funnel. And as you can see, I got much more rejections than the success. But eventually, what matters is the only one for you.
Yeah, and you didn't give up, which is great. So we also talked a lot about kind of the gender parity within, or the lack of it within the venture capital space between male and female, right? I mean, what are some of the challenges that you face, in venture capital as a woman? Or are there any challenges at all?
Yeah, I would say some challenges are like more about for anyone who is still new to the industry initially, who didn't have this background, or who didn't was born in Silicon Valley and went to Stanford, and the whole family roots are in Silicon Valley, because I think venture capital is a very localized business. And then if you really, your family already know tons of entrepreneurs or tons of investors in the Valley, that definitely have that head start or the advantage. So I think initially this maybe not as a woman or a people of color, but I think generally when you as a new person breaking into the industry, there were the initial challenges you face, but there's no other better solution. You have to just hustle and hustle. You have to start from somewhere and then build a relationship. So I think that was the initial challenge. And I think another one was, as I mentioned, still venture capital or private equity industry, when you actually went in there, it's still very, dominated by a particular demographic. And I think the potential challenge there is not just me, but when I was talking to some, fellow female investors or minority investors, I think the general hurdle is about, because at the end of the day in corporate culture, I think that not just VC or PE, it's about you get people who sponsor you, your sponsor in the firm or in the team, and people who typically who can be your sponsor or who really lift you up. And I think from my past experiences as well, are typically people who have the sense of or the feeling of affinity with you. People may share the same background, people who have more empathy about where you come from, people, so otherwise people just they're distant and they are just being professional to you. So I think that's probably the challenges, not just only as a woman, only as a people of color, but for a lot of minorities in any type of organization, it's hard to find, the affiliate or the affinity in that organization, if that makes sense. So, but that being said, I think you cannot just, just complain about, oh, nobody is supporting me. You have to fight to find your path through it, because eventually there will be people, if you really work hard enough, there will be people who notice that, and there will be people who really appreciate talent and who will give you a voice, or who will be your voice, and who give you chances to further grow. So I don't have like a really perfect answer about that, especially, if you're working in a disproportional, with disproportional, how to say that, like ratio of certain type of people with the others. But I think eventually you'll find your way through, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that kind of a good segue, right? It's, again, AAPI month. For those who are not familiar, it's I think it's Asian American Pacific Islander month, where we celebrate, diversity, of course, in the US. Both you and I, we are not, Asian Americans, but we look like Asian Americans, Asians from Asia. How has, this whole wave of, kind of what we call Asian hate, has it affected you personally or in your professional life in any way?
Yeah. So I think I'm glad that you mentioned that distinction, because I felt probably as an Asian, as an Asian American, how this anti-AAPI sentiment would be, I think it could be probably like felt in a different way. Because for me, as someone, who was not born or raised here, for me, I think at the end of the day, if it keeps happening and if it keeps like hurting and discriminating, and I will be like, oh, America sucks. And I would just like, I have other places to go. But I think some of my Asian American friends, I think for them, when we talk about this, I think probably for them, this is their home. They can't say, oh, goodbye, I go to other place, any other where I want. So I first of all, I have to confess that my experience is probably very, very different from like an Asian American angle. And how it affected me personally or professionally, I think I'm lucky enough that I didn't experience any discrimination in my like personal like circle bubble, just probably because of the people around me, or because just I was staying at home all the time. And I think only once was when I was in New York. So I moved to Bay Area from New York, and I was in New York when this COVID pandemic thing broke out in the States, and then started like every city started shutting down itself. Only once I noticed that when I was like walking on the street in New York, and then I noticed that there was a guy like walking towards me, and then he saw me and he like did a big detour to keep distance from me, and it was so obvious. And at that time I felt like a bit offended, but I didn't know the person personally, and I think that's kind of like probably a representative of how people feel about Asian people, especially at the beginning. There was so much fear, so much anxiety in there. But that was something that I experienced in New York, and I heard some horrible stories experienced by my other friends. And I think how it affected me is really more in a way that there was a period of time when I was at that time in New York, and like quarantine happened, that I was so fearful of going out to the street. Although I didn't experience like attack or any verbal assaults myself, but you saw all the news all around, and that really, really added so much stress and anxiety to you. And I was just so afraid at that time of going to the street, and then I get wondering, would I be beaten up by some random person, or would people yell at me? So I think that's more about the mental stress that I experienced for a period of time.
Sure. So, do you think as, Asians here in the US, do you think we have a role to play as, against racism, I guess, if I put it that way?
Yeah.
What can we do, if you have any idea?
Yeah. I probably am not in the best position to say what we should do, but I think I dare and personal, I would give an example of personally what I did. And I think really, really hold it very dear to my heart that I really believe strongly is make your voice be heard, speak up. And I feel like this anti-Asian thing, it's so overdue. It's not just this year. It's not just like after COVID broke up. It's been there and so deep rooted from a long time ago. But only recently, there are so many unfortunate and horrible incidents that happen, especially to older people or, like people who are so vulnerable. And then to some point, people feel, oh, this is enough. I know we have to speak up. But I feel like if everyone, not just Asian, and every other, no matter who you are, if you have a part to take in the society, and if you could stand up against it and speak up earlier, I would say, and this is something I also constantly reflect myself, especially like last year, I was so afraid of being, like looked at in a different way, being biased, discriminated. But if I just, no matter it's just my social platform or something, but if I let this voice be heard, let people know that something unfair is happening, also maybe just honestly confess how I feel. I feel if that happened earlier and everybody could have done that earlier, I think so many unfortunate incidents could have been avoided. So I think what we can do as one of the potential solution is really let your voice be heard, especially I think for in the Asian, the culture is like be a good citizen, not just in the society, but if you're in a team or in like a corporate setting, usually Asian people are like the heads down, hardworking, not making any noises, try to, like let the results speak for yourself, but let's be likable. Let's make friends with everyone and be the nicest person in the team. But I just feel that sometimes it doesn't work out in that way. And you have to, and it's your responsibility to let your voice be heard.
Awesome. Thank you so much. But before we go, I always ask our guests one last question that I ask every single guest. So, what is one word you would like to leave the audience with today and why?
Yeah, I would say open-minded. And to interpret that, I'm being open-minded. I was phrase that as say yes to unexpected opportunities. So, for example, because the opportunity of working in Japan, it was so unexpected. Initially, I was like, strategizing, like whiteboarding how I should develop my career in New York office, and then suddenly this came, and I said yes to it, and I had amazing time living in Japan and working. Got that working experience in Japan. And also because I said yes to, moving to Hawaii, like as a recent example. And I just got to see, the other side of Hawaii, aside from like just being a tourist and enjoying the nature. But I also got like make so many friends, and really, I think this is the best time in my life, and never ever regret that. So I think a lot of things will happen to you in life in the journey that are totally unexpected and may caught you a surprise. But be open-minded and say yes to it. And then you might learn new things, you may discover new things, and you may meet totally new and cool people that you initially didn't plan to. So so yeah, I think just enjoy life as a journey, say yes to unexpected thing, and still think that is the best plan for you, and just make the most out of it.
Awesome. So thank you so much, May, for your words of wisdom today and sharing your experience with us. It's fascinating and very eye-opening, and I hope the audience enjoyed hearing her story. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors and for sharing your experience with the audience.